So before the orange menace we recently had as president over the last 4 years, there was another orange menace famous for getting drunk and crying and obstructing President Obama. But the old orange menace has come out recently to criticize the more recent orange menace for being, I guess, more blatantly fascist than is acceptable in polite society. He has a new book out. We're talking about John Boehner, by the way. His book is a memoir, which is weird in itself because alcoholics aren't usually the most accurate historians. But anyway, his book on the house, a Washington memoir, is what we call whitewashing some of the history and of his participation. Here to join us to discuss this and give us all the details, and always a great point of view, Josh Holland. He is the host of We've Got Issues. Josh, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Juliana. I appreciate that.
So what do you think about this new Boehner coming out to try to look decent?
Well, I should say first that I have not read this book, and I do not intend to read this book. So I'm not going to review the book so much as I want to talk about, as you said in the introduction, what it represents. And I think that what we're seeing right now with the reception of Boehner's book is indicative of the mainstream presses, the legacy media's desperation to find a reasonable conservative, and to distinguish between Trumpism and the excesses of the movement that he leads, and the bigotry and the narcissism and the corruption, and a mythical, moderate, responsible governing Republican Party. And I find it distressing because I've been paying attention throughout most of John Boehner's career. This guy came to Washington, I believe his first term was 1992, either 90 or 92. And he was there throughout the Gingrich Revolution. And we can date back a lot of the polarization that we see today, a lot of the extremism in the Republican Party, the tolerance for corruption, to that era in which he was a leader of that party. I mean, first he was a young gun in the class of 92, 94, in that era. And he worked his way up leadership. And he was there for Tom DeLay, his unique brand of corrupt dealing. He was there for the emergence of the alternative conservative media, which is really driving a lot of the more dangerous polarization in this country. And that conservative media, and we're talking Rush Limbaugh and Fox News, both of which kind of came to prominence in the 90s during the Clinton years. Glenn Beck, on and on. That is the godfather of QAnon and the insurrection at the Capitol and all of that. I mean, that they knew not to say the quiet parts out loud the same way that Trumpism does. They said the quiet parts quietly. But I mean, we can trace all of the dysfunction to that era, during which he was not only silent. I mean, that would understate the case, but John Boehner played an integral role in all of that. He incentivized the hard right faction that he later condemned, and I have read excerpts from the book, even if I haven't read the book. In the book, I know that he goes on and on about the Freedom Caucus and expresses how much of a pain in the ass they were to him under his leadership. But I mean, first of all, he didn't condemn any of the trends that led to that rump of hard right conservatives, and he encouraged it tacitly. So I find it a little demoralizing that all of these political journalists are, and I get that it is so tempting to, stories of a former Speaker of the House, Republican Speaker of the House, calling their former party crazy, and saying that they've gone completely off the rails since they left. I get that that's an appealing story, but I think that we should have a longer institutional memory and have a sense of who this guy was and what he's done to contribute to the things that he bitches about in his book.
Exactly. He did many things he was a major obstacle for President Obama getting his agenda through. They just wanted to obstruct everything that he did, which had a racial undertone. So all of a sudden, when Trump comes in and he's like, he doesn't say I don't like black people, but you can infer it by his white supremacist friends and the both sides have good people on it kinds of comments, etc.
Yeah.
How does he not see himself as at all responsible?
Well, I mean, we don't know what's in his head or what motivated him to write this book. He could very well feel like he bears some responsibility, and he is trying to the degree he can, influence how his role in all of this is recorded by history.
What do you think?
It's self-serving, in other words.
I didn't really see like Liz Cheney and the other quote unquote reasonable Republicans coming out saying we're with Boehner. I don't see the Republican Party having any chance of getting back to any kind of, just quiet corporate fascism like they used to be, as opposed to just like overt insanity, which is what we have now. The Matt Gaetz, all of these stories that keep coming out over and over again. I don't think this is going to stop.
The only thing that could stop it is if there is such a discernible backlash that
in the party
against the party, right? There was a report today, is it Political, New York Times? I forget who reported it, but there was a report today of a conference call with over 100 CEOs of major corporations, and they're talking about how they are uncowed by Mitch McConnell's threats, veiled threats, that they should keep out of politics except to write Republicans checks. That apparently is not.
They step in? I think they stepped in because they're concerned about voter disenfranchisement.
And that the story says, and I thought this was a pretty important piece of that story. It said that for these CEOs, they see this rash of new voting restrictions and the premise upon which they're being justified, that is the big lie about the 2020 election, as not a partisan issue. These guys don't want to touch, a Democrat versus Republican thing. They see it clearly as a small d democratic conflict over whether we will have a small d democracy, right? So I'm not Pollyannish. I don't think that would be enough to cause. Yeah. So right now, what you think of a normal party, a normal party's response to really getting beaten 3 times in a row, and also recognizing that they've lost the popular vote in 7 out of the last 8 presidential cycles, right? They only won the popular vote in 2004 in the middle of a war. The normal reaction, or the kind of expected reaction from a healthy political party, would be a reconsideration of their agenda and their messaging, et cetera, et cetera. And we have not seen that at all.
It's like at some point.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Josh.
I was going to say the only thing that I think could bring that about is continued electoral losses.
I don't think so. I don't think they're going to do that. Personally, I mean, that would be great, continued electoral losses, and I think we should push for that. But they have gone full fascists, and fascists don't care about democracy. So we've bandied the term around. We've gotten closer and closer to it during the Trump administration. A lot of times when we're talking about these groups, the Proud Boys, etc. I remember we had David Nyward on the show talking about the slight differences between the different groups and what they mean, and that they really don't believe in democracy. And I think these attacks on voting rights are just so blatant. We don't actually believe in democracy. So we would like to take your voting rights. And that seems, it seems racist and racially motivated, but it's really, no, we're right no matter what, regardless of what the structure is of our governing system here, which is supposed to be a democracy.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question about that when you talk about the overt fascist factions, right? So our major parties are not set in any sort of ideological stone, right? Mm-hmm. They are very, very flexible, and they are big coalitions, and they move according to power struggles within those coalitions, and also influence, debates within those coalitions, not just power struggles. So if we disaggregate the different groups, yes, those far right people are gone. They're gone. The thing that is effective in terms of fighting against them is, and I know this is always the conservative propaganda machine has been so effective that a lot of people won't say this, but I mean, it's good what Antifa does, which is out these people, research who they are. Most Antifa work is not in the streets, but on a computer screen. They do is they track down members of extremist groups, and they let their employers know, hey, your shipping clerk is a Nazi on the weekends, and that stuff, along with federal prosecutions. January 6th was a big signaled a big shift in the way law enforcement looked at these groups, because they used to not prioritize them, and we can all debate exactly why that is. Maybe there's some sympathy with their ideology. They're white, they're middle-aged often, they support law enforcement, etc., etc. But the January 6th insurgency of dunces put them on their radar. They are now a very high priority for federal law enforcement, and it's tough to be an extremist these days. There's a lot of pushback, right?
But the Boehner book is, as we said at the beginning of the interview, that center right is looking for someone. They're looking for someone to rally behind who can say, "Oh, we still have this center right ideology that you can rally behind."
Yeah.
But I don't think they've really found that person, and I'm not seeing any kind of robust coming together, consolidation of that kind of message.
I think that the process would have to, I mean, let's be very clear. The John Boehners of the Republican Party are completely in the wilderness at this part. They are marginalized within Republican politics, and all roads go through Mar-a-Lago. I mean, that's a cliche, but it's true. If you want to be successful in Republican politics, you've got to kiss the ring and also appeal to that dominant part of the Republican faction. But my larger point is that I don't think you should ever say never, because again, I remember during the 90s, think about how marginalized the left was within the Democratic coalition. I mean, we were way out there. Nobody paid any attention to us whatsoever. Our policy ideas were crazy. And now a lot of them have worked their way into Joe Biden's agenda. He's the kind of consummate old centrist Democrat. And so these things do change. And I think that some electoral whoopings, if they are forthcoming with Trumpism, could persuade the party establishment to go up against its base.
I don't know. I think we're kind of screwed because the the base and those media centers that you discussed at the beginning, they're so intertwined
Yeah, they are.
that you'd have to, I mean, I'm just saying this because talking to people I know, people in my family who used to be just regular kind of Catholic blue collar voters, then they got radicalized with the abortion issue, then their local media got taken over by Sinclair and they started watching Fox. You know, these are working class Democrats who've been really radicalized at against their own best interest, you know, to the right wing. So without media, some sort of shift in the mass media, it just doesn't seem possible that people are going to come to their senses and be like, you know who I miss? Boehner. You know what I mean?
Christine Todd Whitman.
Yeah. Well, Christine Todd Whitman can come back. Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I again, I am not very optimistic about the foreseeable future within the Republican Party. I guess the scenario that I'm that I think could possibly upend this current kind of paradigm in right-wing politics would be the Democrats somehow managed to get electoral reforms passed. And Donald Trump is still active within Republican politics. Most Americans are still appalled by Trumpism and that whole ugly, ugly MAGA movement, because honestly, it's easy to overlook given the media coverage, given how much the mainstream press loves to interview Donald Trump supporters who still support Donald Trump. It's easy to overlook how unpopular he and his movement are.
And I think as Biden starts to overcome the pandemic and with his administration,
but there's another piece of this, because usually what happens with Democrats is they become complacent when they have a president in office, and they get shellacked, as Obama described it in the midterms. So the thing that I think could shake up the Republican establishment is
a shellacking?
if that trend did not hold, because Donald Trump was still in the public eye. And Donald Trump, remember, he had that tendency to motivate both bases. But it appears, let me say this. In 2018, I'm not going to extrapolate more than I should. In 2018, he fired up the Democratic base, but because he wasn't personally on the ballot, he did not fire up the Republican base to the same degree. If that were to happen in the 2022 midterms, I think it might. And then they lose again in 2024. I think if they lost, that would be 6 elections in a row or something like that. That might be enough to cause a rethinking. Hey, maybe that rethinking would happen in the executive suite of Fox.
Here's the question: when is Joe Manchin coming up for re-election, and can we primary him from the left?
No, we can't primary him from the left. No, it's West Virginia. You're never going to get somebody better than Joe Manchin in West Virginia, or not never. As West Virginia currently is composed, you will not get someone better. Could primary Kirsten Sinema.
Okay, so let's just win more other states, so that everything doesn't depend on him.
Yes. Oh God, yes. Please, let's win some other states so everything doesn't depend on either of them. They're both, I call them Cinchin, Cinema and Manchin. I've just put them together like J-Lo.
Josh Holland, writer. We've got issues, and that is such an aptly named podcast. We certainly do have issues. Thanks for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Juliana.